A number of things. Don't be conned. If you're taught that you have to be tough on yourself and strive, you are being conned. You're being conned because it's in somebody else's interest for you to drive yourself into the ground. It's not in your interest to do that. Now, there are many ways in which you can struggle to be your best, which are about encouraging yourself, helping yourself. When things don't go well, you put an arm around yourself, you have another go and have another go. That's great. That's sort of great. But it's when you then start kicking yourself and being angry with yourself and being tough on yourself. What does tough on yourself mean? What it actually means is you get angry with yourself. Well, you're going to just screw up your brain if you do that.
Come join me today with the amazing Professor Paul Gilbert.
Welcome back everyone to Psychology on Demand. I'm here today with Professor Paul Gilbert, author, lecturer, therapist, and creator of compassion-focused therapy. Great to have you on.
Thank you, James.
Today I'm really excited to understand a little bit more about this compassionate thing, what compassionate focused therapy is. And I'm going to be asking a set of questions to kind of understand a bit more how it might be able to help society. So that's what we're going to be doing today. My first question, and probably a good place to start, is exactly what is compassion and compassion-focused therapy? How can my viewers at home understand that a little bit more?
Start with compassion. So compassion is a motivation to be helpful, not harmful. Now, all motivations, so if you're motivated to protect yourself, or motivated for food, or motivated for caring, have to have a way of identifying stimuli and signals appropriate, and then responding. So if you think, your protection system, you're motivated to keep yourself safe. That means you've got to be able to detect threats, first thing. But once you've detected them, then you need to do something. Like if you detect a lion, you run away. But if you're getting close to a cliff, it's probably good to move away, not to run over the cliff. So we call it a stimulus and response. When it comes to compassion and caring, the stimulus is some sensitivity to suffering, distress, or need. That's the first thing. And then the next thing is to do something about it. What are you going to do to address that suffering, distress, or need appropriately? So, for example, if you're a firefighter, you're obviously going to be sensitive to smoke and burning, and you'll want to go in and rescue people. But you'll need to have the skills to be a firefighter, and that requires you to have courage and wisdom. So that turns out to be really important for compassion, that compassion is about addressing suffering, distress, and need, but we have to do it courageously, and we have to do it wisely. So whether you're working with somebody who is maybe dying of cancer, or whether you're working with somebody who's depressed, or whether you're saving somebody from a burning house, it's all the same. You're sensitive to the issue of the distress or the suffering, and then you behave appropriately. But the way you behave is very much dependent upon the type of stress you're dealing with. A bit long-winded, I think, but there we are.
That's fine.
Gives you the idea.
And with kind of this, and I think this was something that I found a little bit tough, because I always thought compassion is this warm, cuddly thing. And I think this is something that you've spoken about previously, but that it's not necessarily just about giving hugs or warmth. You mentioned there it could be wisdom in other ways.
Yes, that's a great question, because it has been taken up by, shall we say, the middle classes, and it's all a bit huggy, lovey-dovey. And that's okay. I like huggy, lovey-dovey. It's really nice. I think it's very nice. But that's not the basis of compassion. I mean, I'm not religious myself, but if you think about the story of Christ, we talk about the compassion of Christ because he gave his life to save us. That's the story. Whether you believe it or whether you don't, that's another matter. But that's not about huggy-lovey. If you think about firefighters risking their lives, if you think about the doctors that risked their lives during COVID, That's not huggy-lovey. That's a real dedication to address suffering in people. And when it comes to working with ourselves, sometimes if we've been traumatized or we have major depressions, we need quite a lot of courage and wisdom to address our own personal suffering. That's not huggy-lovey.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess when working, you said there about that trigger response.
Yeah.
I've often found, kind of working with people myself, the thing they do struggle with the most is realizing they're in distress to even start with.
Yeah.
Is that something that's quite common in compassion-focused therapy? Is first getting them to even notice they're in that kind of state to respond to it?
Well, yes, very much so, being aware, and also being aware of emotions and they're not being processed. So sometimes you find that people are angry prone, very angry. Actually underneath, they're not dealing with real grief and loss that have occurred in their lives. Sometimes people who are very into sadness and they're not able to really deal with the rage. So you can have people who kind of one emotion helps them to avoid another. But the key thing with the therapy, if I can maybe move on to the therapy, how do we use this motivation? And incidentally, I should say that when you are engaged with paying attention to suffering, trying to do something about it, your brain state, what's going on in your brain and in your body, is very different from if you're doing something else, like being vengeful or something like that. So the compassion really creates brain states and brain changes which are really helpful to the body. And we now know there's quite a lot of evidence that people who live a compassionate life, they're physiologically healthier than those who live a more aggressive, competitive life, actually. But we can come back to that. So let's think about the therapy then. How did it begin? Well, I was trained in various therapies, but one of my primary approaches is called cognitive behavior therapy. Now, in cognitive therapy, what happens is you have people who have various conditions of anxiety or depression, and they're usually associated with thoughts that are the same sort of theme as the emotions. So people who have anxiety, they tend to have anxiety thoughts, and people who are depressed, they tend to see the world, themselves and the future in negative ways. So they might have the idea that, I'm depressed, I'm a failure, I haven't achieved anything in my life, I'm not really lovable, and so on. So in cognitive therapy, what you do is you help people to become aware of the ways in which they're thinking, and then to stand back from those thoughts and see, are they balanced? Are they reasonable? Are they realistic? I mean, would you talk to a friend like that? And quite often when you help people sort of stand back and start to think, well, maybe I'm not quite so much of a failure as I think because I've achieved this or I've done that, or I've actually got some friends or whatever, this can be helpful. But I worked with chronically depressed people who had been depressed a long time, and they could do that. So they could stand back and say, yes, I feel I'm a failure and I feel I shouldn't have been born, but I suppose there's another aspect, which is, yes, I've got a husband who loves me or whatever, but it doesn't make any difference. So many years ago, I had a lady who was severely depressed and suicidal, and had been adopted and had lots of traumas in her early life. And but she'd made a good marriage, she had 3 lovely children. And she was very much like that. She could see on the surface she should be okay, but it didn't work. So I said to her, so look, when you start thinking about the fact you've got a husband that loves you and so forth, how do you actually hear that in your mind, and really think about the fact you've got 3 children and they're doing really well and you've been a good mother. Speak out your thoughts as you hear them. And she said, well, as I actually hear them in my mind. I said, yes. She said, okay. Come on, you're doing cognitive therapy, aren't you? You got a husband who loves you. You got 3 lovely children. I mean, they're doing pretty good. That means you must be a good mother. For goodness sake, look at the evidence. Oh my goodness, hang on a minute. Whoa, is that right? Anyway, to cut a long story short, it turned out that clients, patients could actually generate alternative thoughts, but the emotional textures of their thoughts were hostile, and that the hostility in depressed people, in the background, was quite common. So to find this was quite common. So that led to the obvious thing. Okay, well, let's see if we can warm up those thoughts a little bit, make them a bit more huggy, lovey, if you like. let's see if we can generate a real compassion feeling when we're thinking about, look, my depression is being very painful to me, but I've made a good marriage and I've got 3 children that are doing really well. Let's see if we can create that feeling. And this client said, why? No, I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. That's not going to help me. Just being kind to myself, and as you would say, love me. No, I'm not doing that. It's rubbish. So the second shock, really, so the first shock was realizing the hostility in the textures of how people were trying to help themselves, trying to force like that. And the second one was people not really wanting to do it. And the third shock, which is really the key thing of the therapy, is the fact that when they did start to do compassion, they actually started to feel worse. Now, to begin with, that was kind of a bit confusing. So they'd start to do a bit of compassion work of focusing and just imagining that feeling, and then they'd say, oh, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. It makes me feel odd, It actually makes me a bit irritable, you know what I mean? Do we have to do this compassion shit, So they used to really push back, right? I didn't want to do it. So and I started to explore that, what we discovered is that all motivational systems carry their own trauma, right? So for example, if you're somebody who loves holidays, you're an explorer type, and you love holidays, you look forward to holidays, and then one year you go on a holiday and you become very ill or get badly beaten up or something like that, and put you in hospital for a while. What happens the following year when you actually are triggered to think about holidays? Now, the chances are that your body will react with anxiety because your trauma memory of being very ill last time you were on holiday. So even though you've got a lot of positive memories, the trauma memory will be triggered. Now, if you've got a lot of trauma memories in your attachment or in your care system, if you've got a lot of times where you've been treated badly or abused, or you've had a lot of grief and loss and sadness in your life, if your relationship with your caring family didn't go very well, what happens when we start to begin to develop our way of generating compassion is we start triggering those feelings, because that's the brain system that we're going to be using. We're using the care system in your brain, right? But then we start triggering these negative emotional memories associated with caring or not being cared for. So compassion-focused therapy is a way of working through some of the really difficult experiences that people have had in that childhood in order for them then to be able to use all of the systems in the brain associated with compassion and caring. So that's the basis of the therapy.
Okay.
It's a bit of a long answer. I'm sorry about that.
That's a big
answer.
And loads of things were popping up there. I was hearing what sounded like a little bit of the inner critic, is that kind of that thing that's talking about. And I was also hearing there that, and I guess this is quite, as I wouldn't say I was a CFT practitioner, I'm not trained in it. So my understanding is kind of this surface compassion, but you would actually go into the past and look at those interactions, those caring systems. So that's really, really interesting. And I guess the thing that I'm quite interested by is this inner critic voice, and how we internalize it. So for kind of those back in the audience, so what would you describe? What would be your description of the inner critic? Because I wouldn't be able to. I don't think I'd be able to conceptualize that very easily. And how does this kind of latch on to us? How do we get that voice?
How do you get it? Okay, so critical processes are, you won't be surprised to hear, complicated. There is more than one type of critical process. There's about 5 or 6. So let me just talk to you about a few of them. So first of all, let's begin with an example in nature. Imagine a dominant attacking a subordinate. What does the subordinate have to do to protect itself? It has to be submissive. Okay, it has to close down, has to stop exploring, it has to recognize that it's inferior compared to the dominant. So in order to protect yourself, you've got to realize You can't attack the dominant, otherwise you get really pounded.
Yeah.
So our brains are orientated, all right, not to fight back, but to actually close down. Internalize, okay?
Yeah.
So don't, How does that relate to things like self-blame and self-criticism? Well, that's often where these processes can start in childhood, where maybe powerful others, parents or teachers or bullies have really labeled us in bad or whatever in some way, and we internalize that. We're not able to get rid of it. Now, a very good example, which is an anthropological example, is that there was a South American society called the Aztecs. We often use this example in training. Now, the Aztecs believed in the sun god that gave life, and in order to please the sun god, so that the rains would come, would end the droughts, and we'd get fertility and success in war, you had to sacrifice people. And they had a culture where they literally cut out the living hearts of people on the altars and so forth, even their own children, tragically to say. Okay, so they're doing all this to appease authority, to try and get authorities to be on their side, to please their God, and so on and so on. The question is, what happens the following year when the rains still don't come? Okay? And they're not winning their wars. Now, there is no data at all, there's no evidence at all that they ever went onto the altars and said, "Oi! Oi, you bastards, where's the bloody rains? You cheated on the deal, mate. If you don't send us the rains, we're going to go and find another bloody god, right? Do your business, otherwise." No, can't do that. That's too scary. What do? "Oh, I'm so sorry. What have we done? What have we done to upset you? We've clearly done something wrong to upset you. Don't worry, we will sacrifice twice as many people next year."
Oh, wow. Okay.
And you see this everywhere. This concept of, in religion, because you're going to ask me about that, because when you look at life, many people look at life and think, actually, it's a bit of a horror show, isn't it, really? We come into life, we don't stay very long, we decay, we die, terrible grief, we are subjected to all kinds of diseases, all life has to eat other life. Oh, who on earth would create something like that? Because it's pretty awful. But in order for us to kind of deal with that, we have to say, yes, well, the Creator is really good, loving. It's that we're sinners, It's all Eve's fault. She screwed it up for us, really, because it's our sin. That's the reason. So this tendency to self-blame in the context of a dominant authority that can hurt you is very, very common. It's what we call archetypal. So that's the first aspect of self-criticism, is that we are naturally inhibited in being angry to those who have let us down or hurt us or have abandoned us or whatever. And children often try to find ways in which they can win approval from their parent. They're desperate for their parent to love them and to care for them, and sometimes people will just work ever so hard to show they're talented or to prove themselves to the parent because they're desperate to get the love and care of the parent. And if things go wrong, they don't blame the parent because they want them to love them. They'll blame themselves. So that's one aspect about how self-criticism can become a process by which we think about ourselves, and that we sort of absorb that and we would start to think, yes, it's true, I really am bad, I really am inferior, it really is my fault. That's one route. Now, another route is more direct, which is where you really are labeled as inferior and bad and so forth, or you're bullied, and also some of the experiences that children have in their peer groups, particularly if they have slight difficulties of being awkward or something like that, then the children, because children can be very hostile to each other, they can be quite bullying and unpleasant to each other. So you can actually have direct experiences from non-family members, which gives you a feeling that you don't fit in, you're not really wanted, you're not really up to it, not really talented. So there are different dimensions, right? So if you look at, for example, the ways the culture creates ideas of the way you should be in order to be, say body shape. I mean, many young women, for example, get caught up in the idea that you've got to be a particular body shape, and if you're not a particular body shape, then you're not quite up to the And then they begin to become very angry and upset and critical of themselves, and they might start restricting their food or whatever and start dieting and stuff like that because they're working against the self that they're not happy with. So self-criticism is a complicated process that involves often, not always, the inhibition of anger to the other. That's hurt you. You blame yourself rather than them.
Okay.
Then you kind of take that on board and you develop this way of being with yourself, which can actually be quite hostile.
So there's different elements. So there's
Lots of different elements.
internal hostility. So it's got to go somewhere. So go here. This is the only thing they can do. Or kind of societal. You're not meeting this expectation. Be this. Be this.
Yeah, that's right.
With some kind of hostile memory in there.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. There's a sort of disappointment in the self, that frustration that I can't be the way I want to be. I can't be as attractive or as intelligent or as talented as I want to be. So that frustration now generates an attack on the self, because you can't. You don't know how to deal with the frustration with yourself, because that frustration is associated with rejection and abandonment and so forth. So because you can't be the way you want to be, and in your mind it's associated with all these other negative things, that generates a lot of frustration and hostility. Now, actually, the frustration and hostility is towards the judger, but you internalize it. Because you really should say, hang on a moment, why do I have to meet your bloody standards? That's not right. If you're going to judge me like that, then sod you. I don't want anything to do with you. But of course we can't do that, because we want them to we want to be related to them. So we have to inhibit that frustration at what they're doing, at what they're judging us. And say, no, it's okay, you can judge me as being overweight. It's all right. It's all my fault. I know it's all my fault.
Yeah. It feels clearer. I think I bet everyone can kind of think of this in some way where you've taken on the view of the person who's not been nice to you.
Yeah. Instead of attacking the judger, right? Okay, that's not you. You don't have a right to judge me that way, and I'm not going to play your game, because you want to be accepted. You want to be. It's very difficult to say, to show your anger towards them, put their negative judgment. They're judging you, or you perceive that they are, maybe they're not, but you perceive that society or other people are judging you. And of course, as we've discussed before, social media is full of this stuff, full of judgment and putting people down and stuff like that, you know. So people internalize these processes, and instead of actually pushing against the judgment, they internalize and say, yes, it's true, I have got to lose weight, and I am too overweight, and I'm not attractive, and I'm not this, and I'm not that, and I've got to push, and I've got to do that in order to win the approval of society or my group or whoever it is.
Okay. How do we combat what sounds like a very common thing?
Common.
Sorry?
It's very common, common. Yeah, it's very common.
Feels common. I feel like I could talk to a lot of people, and I'm sure many people watching, if you said, have you internalized some voices that aren't good for you? I bet that'd be quite a lot of people. How can we, is there something we need to do societally, or do we need to, what would be your thoughts on how we could help stop this internalizing, this thing that's happening so common?
Well, I think it's a great question. The first thing is that we need much better education of how the mind works. As you know, in CFT, we have the view that the mind is very tricky because really it's evolved for survival and reproduction. I mean, we're part of a long, 100 million or however long it is, years of the evolution of brains and so forth. So it's very, very tricky, and therefore it has all of these potential problems within it that we need to be aware of. So that's the first thing, is to realize you have a brain that you never chose, you didn't design it, you didn't choose to experience anxiety or depression, and you don't train. All of the things that cause us pain, we don't train in. We don't wake up in the morning and think, you know what, I'm really happy, but I think I need a bit of depression, you know what I mean? I think I need to practice being depressed. So that process then of learning to pay attention to how your brain is working, because evolution is built it that way, it's not your fault, is very, very important. That's the first thing. So why am I getting caught up in this self-criticism? Why do I hate myself? What's that all about? Well, it's because your brain is playing tricks on you, right? And if you can begin to understand how it's playing tricks on you, because it's caught up in this process of inhibiting your anger towards those that might hurt you and blaming yourself, because you have great needs or desires to be, seen as talented and attractive and all that stuff. So when those get frustrated, it makes you angry, or you feel you're a failure, or somebody's told you that. When you begin to understand, actually, none of that's your fault, actually. You never chose any of that. That's not your fault at all. So it's standing back from it, and also recognizing that one of the problems with self-criticism is not just what you say, it's the way you say it, right? It's the hostility, okay? So when we work with some clients who are self-critical, who think that they are unlovable or stupid, I mean, they can be vicious, They don't just call themselves an idiot. They say, you fucking idiot, you're fucked up again. That raging at the self, that raging is really damaging. And so you want to help people realize that actually self-criticism is not just, oh, you didn't do that very well. It's actually a raging, it's a hitting into the self with quite a lot of hostility. So that's the second thing. Firstly, recognizing your brain will do these tricks through no fault of your own. The second thing is realizing that the criticism that's going to do you harm is usually quite hostile and very attacking, because we can be critical in a good way. Look, I made a mistake. I'm glad I see that now. If I go and have guitar coaching, it's really good for my teacher to say, look, you've got your hands around. Oh, thanks. Okay, so I can change now. It's the hostility that does. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, don't be conned by your society, right? Society will con you into believing you've got to be like X or like Y. But you need to find you. You need to find what it is to be you. What's important to you? What are your values? Okay, as opposed to living to the values of society, and they're just interested in manipulating you. They don't have any interest. Society doesn't really have any interest in you. They just want you to conform so they can manipulate you to buy their goods and products or whatever it is.
I think that's really important, because literally people watching will be able to just swipe and then see something else and something else and something else. I think
so the key thing is, so sorry to interrupt you, but that hostility, get hold of that hostility, and that's where compassion comes in, because compassion is compassionate to the hostility, because compassion says to the hostility part of you, look, I know that you're really angry and you're swearing at me and all the rest of it, because underneath you're really frightened, aren't you? Underneath, you're frightened of being rejected. You're frightened of not being good enough. You're frightened of not being wanted. You're frightened of being abandoned. You're frightened of being left behind. That's why you're so angry, because you are really, really frightened. And you're really frightened because underneath that, there's a lot of sadness of feeling lonely or unloved or disconnected.
I bet that's quite hard-hitting to anyone watching who is feeling a lot of anger and then realizing that. But also I think very hard-hitting part is the bit that I don't think I know anyone who hasn't internalized something where it's actually quite mean, it's quite horrible, and it's from people who, and I think what you're saying about that dynamic, it makes it look very clear. If they're here and you were here, you've just gone,
that's
wow.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what so when you attack yourself or swear at yourself, whatever, what you're doing is you're stimulating circuits in your brain. And we know this because we've done studies looking at what happens in the brain when people are self-criticism. You're stimulating the same circuits as if somebody else was saying it to you. Just like if you have a sexual fantasy, you're stimulating exactly the same circuits as if it was a real person that you were thinking. Because it's actually been created by your own mind, doesn't change the circuits it's using. It uses the same circuits. So if somebody else is shouting at you and making you feel inferior, if you do it to yourself, you will stimulate the same circuits, and then you will feel bad, you'd get depressed, and you'll feel terrible.
Oh, okay. So what might be diagnosed as depression in lots of places could be internal inner critics and severe kind of internal negative messages.
Very much so. And remember, that criticism is always underneath connected to a sense of loneliness in some way, a sense of disconnection, of not feeling engaged with others. People, when they're depressed, they sometimes say, it's like there's a screen in front of me, like a barrier in front of me, that I'm disconnected from people. I don't feel connected to people. When you working with depressed people, if they're distressed, you go, if you did give them a hug, they say it's very nice, but I can't feel it.
Yeah.
Because all those systems are being knocked out, you see. So self-criticism that's related to depression is often associated with that sense of loneliness and disconnection.
Okay. And so when we think about someone receiving warmth, kindness, compassion, if the system's been working well and they've been receiving love, warmth, compassion, good messages, then they get all that kind of release of good neurochemicals that are neuroscientists, dopamine, release oxytocin. That's the one, isn't it?
That's
we get that nice. So they'd get that nice release and they'd feel good.
Yeah.
Someone with a trauma attached to where all that warmth and compassion should have been. Yeah. What do they get when you first? So before you've worked through it, what would they be getting? How would you kind of explain that kind of message or experience?
Yes, because all motives carry their own traumas, right? So the care system, the motivation to care and the motivation to respond to caring, which is partly of the attachment system. If that carries trauma, the first thing that tends to happen is that people become uncertain about it. It can be confusing. It can make them feel distressed, right? Okay. So I'll give you an example of somebody, people I work with, just a typical example, really. What you do as a therapist is you do things like empathic bridging.
So you're explaining there a little bit about kind of emotional bridging. Could you help the audience understand a little bit more about what this thing is, what emotional bridging is?
Yes, it's empathic bridging by the therapist, right? Because sometimes with people who are depressed, and sometimes people who are quite non-compassionate, they've got disconnected from their emotional pain, they've numbed it out in a way. So I'll give you an example. This is an example of somebody I saw many years ago, but there are many other examples I could offer you. So this person had a very difficult upbringing, and her mother could be quite unpredictable at times, kind sometimes, but at other times quite hostile and so forth. And so she would talk about various experiences, such as, a time when she was going to have a birthday party when she was about 6 or something like that. And then in the afternoon, the mother just decided she didn't want to be bothered. I can't be bothered with that. It's too much of a worry for me, and sent all the kids home. And so I'd say to her, that must have been so painful and upsetting for you. All your friends were coming and you're going to have jelly or whatever. And she said, yeah, well, it probably was. But, that was how Mum was. We knew how she was. I mean, it wasn't just for me. It was for my brother and sister too. So we were all, that's the way she was. I suppose it was upsetting, but there we are. In other words, not really any emotional contact to it. Yeah. So then another memory would come up over the time when she was at school, when she was 7 or 8 or whatever, waiting for her mum to come and pick her up. And the minutes ticked by into half an hour or however long it was. Just not knowing, right? And again, I'd say to her, well, that must have been quite frightening and upsetting to you, just waiting, not knowing if your mum would come, or were you were just left there and all the other kids had gone home. And she said, yes, I think it probably was, but that's the way it was. So once again, you see this sort of slightly, this incredible memory, but actually not much emotion in it. Sort of, yes, I suppose it was, sort of thing. So what you do as a therapist, you keep this bridging. So that must have been, gosh, when I hear that story, it makes me feel so whatever. So there's all kinds of ways you do it. And then one time, she was talking about the time when she'd been hit with a hairbrush and gone to her room. She was very distressed and laid on the bed and looked out at the window. and just really wanted another mother. If only I could have another mother. Maybe there's another. She imagined another mother out there. She said through her tears, she remembers through her tears, she saw all the stars twinkling, and she imagined that the stars would become a chariot, and this chariot would bring this new spirit mother or some kind of mother for her. And that was such a moving story that she told me. And so what you do really is you add in a little bit of the emotion that she's not feeling. So I was able to say to her, so there was a part of you that was really yearning, you know, Mummy, please come, please come, please come, please. So you put in that emotion. And of course at that point, then she started to cry, and then we got in touch with that yearning. And when they get into those states where they open up into the emotion that they've held in their body for so long, they start talking, and you know, it all came out in a rush. Yes, I've always felt so alone. I've never felt I was going to be loved. I was never going to be loved. I knew I wasn't. So you work through that grief and stuff, because when you work through the grief, when you work through all the ability to be in touch with that pain, and the ability to be able to tolerate that degree of pain, because it's pretty intense, that opens up all these other systems in your care system, which means you can now start to become empathic to your pain. But if your pain's been cut off, if you've been cut off for your pain, how can you be empathic to pain you can't feel? Well, you can't, right? So you've got to be able to kind of start feeling that. So that's what we call empathic bridging, where the therapist really gives voice to and brings into the room the emotion that the client is unable to experience. And it takes time. It's not quick. You know, it can take many sessions before actually the body actually starts to engage with the emotional memory. I mean, Freud called it defected memory, in other words, memory without emotion, because the emotion has been taken out of the memory because it's too painful.
So, almost like filling in the blanks. So there's memory, there's me. I'm not with them.
Yeah,
I'm sick.
that's right.
And I in some of my other videos, I also talk about kind of trauma processing and moving through things.
Yeah.
If you can't feel it, how are they going to move through? So
that's right.
it sounds quite a powerful technique, and kind of giving the voice to all that hurt and saying, be there.
Yeah.
And I guess it's kind of this under kind of tone then of being cut off from emotions, from trauma. How might this kind of be seen in society? So if say someone was very cut off from their own hurt, what would they be like in everyday life then that might look a bit different from someone who could bring in warmth or kindness to themselves?
Well, it's a fascinating and important question, and there's some data on this. There's been some studies published looking at people who are harmful. And if you show them pictures of distress, like crying babies or something like that, they don't really respond. Their brain doesn't light up with distress and sadness and so forth. But what's interesting, if you also show them pictures of them being distressed, doesn't show up either. So they're not able to respond to their own experiences of distress. They're kind of frozen out from their distress. And this is important because in the work that we do in the prisons, one of the key things really is before people can come to terms with the harm they've caused, they have to be able to process the harm that was caused to them. Until they can be in touch with their pain of being harmed, it's difficult for them to be in touch with the pain they caused by harming, all right? So if you freeze up these systems of connecting to emotional pain, it can go both ways. You can be both disconnected from yours, but you can also be disconnected from the pain you're causing others. So this is really quite important. In CFT, facilitating the process of grief and rage, particularly to the losses and traumas of early childhood, is very important. So we use a lot of cognitive therapy, but it has to be textured by working through these emotions that can be shut off.
And I guess in today's society is a lot of push to be more brutal, more competitive. I think you said before that, I talked a little bit kind of angering young men as well. Some of the most common material that's out there is kind of be more brutal, be hard on yourself and push yourself harder, always be better. It's kind of almost a message of unobtainable level of achievement and what you should have, and a very critical nature towards the self. When you think about that in relation to CFT, what can we do in society, or what would be our approach in society to help young men or people who have maybe not just men, maybe also females who've been told this message of brutality and competitiveness, and what would be your thoughts about that message?
A number of things. Don't be conned. If you're taught that you have to be tough on yourself and strive, you are being conned. You're being conned because it's in somebody else's interest for you to drive yourself into the ground. It's not in your interest to do that. Now, there are many ways in which you can struggle to be your best, which are about encouraging yourself, helping yourself. When things don't go well, you put an arm around yourself, you have another go and have another go. That's great. That's sort of great. But it's when you then start kicking yourself and being angry with yourself and being tough on yourself. What does tough on yourself mean? What they actually means is you get angry with yourself. Well, you're going to just screw up your brain if you do that. Okay, so you don't want to be doing that. So yes, by all means, try to do the best you can. That's always a good thing to do. But the means by which you do that is very important. Okay, learning to do that compassionately, have what we call compassionate motivation to do well. So we always say the secret of success is the ability to fail. So when my patients used to come and see me, I used to say to them, I'm not going to teach you how to succeed because that's okay, you can do that. I'm going to teach you how to fail, because if you know how to fail without kicking yourself in the head when you go down, you're much more likely to get up and have another go, right? And learn from your mistake if you made a mistake. So competitiveness is okay. It's this issue that toughness is somehow about aggressiveness. It's not about, toughness is not about kindness, support, understanding, but it is, actually. That's the real toughness. But people are being sold a con that you should be this sort of aggressive. Well, no, you can be like that, but anger is not good for you. It's bad for your brain, it's bad for your heart. It's bad for your relationships. If you want to have supportive relationships, then you have to learn how to be supportive. So, and what you see in a lot of the things on the social media, these tough guys talking about being tough, they're all damaged guys. I mean, come on. You look at their backgrounds, they've all had horrible things happen to them. They're all cut off from their emotions, and that's all they know. And so they try and tell everybody else to be like that. But it's you know, you can follow that sort of disconnected life if you want, I suppose. But we're humans. We don't have to do that. There's so much more to what we are capable of doing, how we are capable of supporting and helping each other, and certainly trying to do our best and so on. There's quite a lot of work happening now in sport, recognizing that if you're, you know, the best teams are the teams that really are cooperative and care for each other. It's not teams that are critical and hostile to each other, particularly on the field. I mean, if somebody misses a goal, for example, the team needs to get that person back as quickly as possible, get their confidence back, get them to understand, look, it's okay, it's a mistake. You know, you're a great player, you're still a great player. You missed the goal, but there's going to be another opportunity coming along. You need the ability to reanimate that person with a sense of being okay, right? Because if you criticize them, you know, how much money are we paying you? For what? For that kick? Are you serious? So actually, compassion is the way in which we encourage, we support people when it goes wrong, right? That's the whole point of compassion. Compassion is sensitivity to suffering and distress. We suffer when it goes wrong. We're disappointed, we're upset, you know. So compassion is really the way, and support and understanding and kindness, that's really the way in which people will get the best out of themselves and the best out of what they're doing and the best out of their relationships. Hostility and all this toughness nonsense, no, that's not taking you anywhere. That'll take you into loneliness and emptiness.
I think that's one of the biggest messages I wanted to get out there. So I'm so glad you've said that. And I bet you there are some people who would literally go just one swipe or one thing, and they'll have the opposite message. So I think it's so powerful to have. It sounds like you just if you do the anger, you do do that system, the I should be better system, you end up isolated. It's not long term, it's bad for your body. It sounds like seeing toughness as kindness to the self and the ability to fail and get back up and incorporate your group. If we could see it like that, that would help society.
That is genuine courage and wisdom. That is courage and wisdom. Where we acknowledge our pain, we don't hide from it. We acknowledge the pain in each other and we reach out to help that as best we can, right? That's the key thing. We don't go around criticizing and beating people up and, beating ourselves up and all of that stuff. That's just not helpful at all. That's just because we are emotionally disconnected, and we're emotionally disconnected because of traumas in our past. So we're just, the trauma that's happened to us in our past becomes the way we poison other people around us, basically. But there is a big movement now for the concept of compassion in men, and it's lovely to see that, I mean, there's some, as I mentioned before, think about the firefighter or the COVID worker or the rescue workers that risk their lives to save others. I mean, you can't call that weak, can you? I mean, that's just ridiculous. These are the most courageous. I mean, women do it as well, of course, but that's an example of compassionate courage, where I will risk myself for you. Now, if that's not toughness, I don't know what is. Beating yourself up and having to be number one and Mr. Strength and all that, that's just silly. That's just silly stuff, really. But it's harmful. That's the problem, it's harmful. And it leaves these young guys feeling failures and not really having clear role models about what it is to be, a genuinely wise, courageous guy. Is the guy that follows the moral course, the guy that follows the course of how can I live to be helpful, not harmful? How can I live to be somebody that leaves the world a better place than they found it? Okay, because you have to remember, one day you will die. What will you take with you? You're not going to take your trophies with you. There's no pockets and shrouds. You're not going to take your money. You're not taking anything with you. The only thing you take with you is the kind of person you. That's all you can. That's all you've got. Is what kind of person have you been? What have you done in the world? What have you done to help those who needed your help?
I think this is one of the biggest pulls of compassion. I think for me in my work is all the things you're saying is that people need to know that it's brave to take on the emotion, sit with the emotion. That's bravery. That's toughness. And then move forward with that. I don't know as much about the kind of neurobiology, but the idea that it's good for our brains and our bodies. Let's remember that as well.
It's good for your brain. Helps grow your frontal cortex, makes you more intelligent.
And so I think it's been absolutely amazing, kind of understanding a bit more about compassion, about how it goes a little bit awry, maybe in the attachment process. A little bit about one of the techniques. I know there's so many techniques, we wouldn't be able to cover them, but just one little thing there about kind of emotional bridging in helping people. And then looking a little bit about society as the bigger picture. And again, we could probably talk for hours about different parts of society, but for particularly there, a little bit about kind of young men and some of the messages that sound like the opposite of compassion. But I really appreciate your time and exploring those. I guess just for my viewers out there, so that they can find find you, if they're a practitioner, find out more about compassion-focused therapy, or just start their journey in understanding compassion to the self, what would you kind of advise to my viewers, either practitioner or someone who's just interested or wants to help themselves in some way?
Well, the main thing is firstly to understand what we actually mean by compassion, and this idea that basically compassion is our preparedness to engage with suffering, distress, or need. Right. So, and then the second part is, okay, so now I've got to work out what will be helpful and what not helpful. Because, for example, if I see somebody fall into a fast-flowing river and I think, I must save them, so I jump in, but unfortunately I've got my Wellington boots on and I can't swim, and I see. So that's what we call reckless compassion. So you need the wisdom as well as the courage. That's really, really important. So a lot of the reasons that people turn away from compassion, particularly maybe young males, is because they haven't really understood what it is. They think it's just having ease or being kind or being soft. That's okay. Those are nice. But those are ways of being compassionate. But there are many different ways in which we are compassionate, in which we are able to address suffering, which are really about how we deal with pain in others, but also how do we deal with pain in ourselves. The courageous way of dealing with pain within ourselves is to begin to open up and to face that some of that pain is incredibly painful, like the yearning to be loved or wanted. The ability to acknowledge that and to work with that, that's courage. That takes courage. Now, by doing that, you help your brain, but if you haven't got the courage, then you'll close it down and you'll say, I don't need anybody. When have I ever needed anybody? When has anybody ever been helpful to me? I don't need anybody. Well, if you do that, you're going against everything associated with human evolution. Human evolution is all about the ways in which we interact with each other and help each other and support each other. That's why the species that we are what we are, with the science we've got. We've got the science we've got because we are an amazing species that work together. It's not one person that developed a mobile phone. It's thousands and thousands, if not millions, going right back to firstly electricity and then understanding batteries and then understanding blah, 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 blah. It's an interconnected way of being. We are interconnected at all points of our society, and even our bodies are interconnected. When you experience love and care from others, this is doing really important things to your brain, whereas if you're pushing people away and you feel you don't need them, that's just not good. So stay with the science, find out about what does it mean to have your DNA build you as a biological organism that's going to last for 70 or 80 years, and then you're out of here. What does it mean that you are a consciousness that exists in this body? What's that all about? So start thinking about how you can find out about that and how you're going to get this biological stuff to work in a way that's helpful, not harmful. And that's your wisdom. And that takes some time to work out.
Yeah, good message for those little homework from today. And if they want to kind of find you, so you have kind of a big get together in October, don't you?
Yeah, we have a conference in Birmingham. It's on the website. Yeah.
So, and the website is I can see right there, www.compassionatemind.co.uk. So please do check out that. I think we've had what we could have explained could have been loads. So we've managed to get a little bit of understanding there of compassion-focused therapy. But I know you've got lots of books. We've got them all behind us.
Yes, lots of
particularly the one on depression one was really helpful for me and learning a bit about compassion-focused therapy. So yeah, please do check all those out and find Paul Gilbert on the website at the conference, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to ramble on as I do.
It's been great. Excellent.